The wind carried dust and despair through the crooked alleys of Dusty Hollow, a frontier town where men's tempers were quicker than their guns. The sun hung low, casting long orange shadows on the weather-beaten saloon walls and the faded sign of Tucker's General. It was there, in the middle of Main Street, that the sound of fists striking flesh broke the evening calm. 2 Cowboys Reed Mallory and Clayton Boone were pounding on an older man, kicking him where he lay half-conscious on the dirt. Reed's hat had fallen off, his face flushed with rage and whiskey. "You think you can cheat us, old man?" he barked, spitting to the side. Clayton, lean and mean, drove his boot into the man's ribs again. "Ain't no one crosses the Boone brothers and walks away clean." The victim coughed blood, clutching his chest, whispering, "I didn't." "Take your money." But his voice was swallowed by another blow. Across the road, behind the half-open door of the livery stable, Noconi watched. He was an Apache, broad-shouldered, sun-darkened skin, hair long and black as midnight, tied loosely behind his neck with leather cord. His chest was bare beneath his buffalo hide vest, and around his neck hung a string of turquoise beads and bone charms. He'd come to town quietly, just to trade for supplies and ride on before sunset. But now, the sight before him burned into his blood. Noconi knew the man being beaten. He was Samuel Brigg, a weathered ranch hand who'd once given Noconi water on a scorching day in the desert, no questions asked, no fear in his eyes. Noconi owed him nothing. Yet everything inside him said he couldn't stand by. The street was near empty, most townsfolk peering through half-closed windows, unwilling to interfere. The sheriff's office door was shut, the badge likely busy drinking inside the saloon. The world had gone quiet except for grunts, boots, and broken breath. Noconi stepped from the shadows. His boots made no sound on the dust, but his presence did. Reed looked up first, squinting through the haze. "You got something to say, Redskin?" He jeered. Noconi's eyes, dark, calm, and burning, met his. "Stop," he said, voice low and steady, like thunder rolling over distant hills. Clayton laughed, wiping sweat from his jaw. "Well, look at here, Reed. We got ourselves a noble savage comin' to play hero." Reed grinned cruelly. "You best keep walking, Apache. This ain't your business." But Noconi didn't move. His gaze fell on Samuel's limp form, blood pooling beneath his beard, one hand twitching weakly. A slow breath escaped Noconi's chest, and with it came a look that chilled even the meanest hearts. "I said," Noconi repeated. "Stop." The brothers exchanged glances. Clayton pulled his revolver halfway from his belt. "Maybe we teach you the same lesson, E.H.?" The next moment came fast and brutal. Clayton drew. Noconi moved. In one sweeping motion, Noconi kicked the revolver out of Clayton's hand, caught Reed's swinging arm, and twisted until bone popped. Reed screamed. A heartbeat later, Noconi struck him square across the jaw with his elbow, sending him sprawling. Clayton lunged again, but Noconi ducked, grabbed his shirt front, and slammed him against the watering trough. Water splashed, blood mixed with mud, and the fight ended as fast as it started. Both brothers lay gasping in the dirt, humiliated and beaten before the gathering eyes of townsfolk who dared not move moments earlier. Noconi crouched beside Samuel, lifting him gently. "You're safe," he murmured. The old man's breath rattled, his eyes fluttered open. "Noconi, I thought they'd kill me." "They won't," Noconi said quietly. "Not tonight." From the balcony of the saloon, a woman had been watching. Her auburn hair caught the dying sunlight, and her expression was something between awe and fear. Evelyn Carter, 30, widow of the late town physician, had seen violence before, but nothing like the calm fury in this Apache's eyes. Something about him unsettled her, yet drew her near, as if fate had dragged her into his story too. The sheriff finally stumbled from the saloon, head askew, eyes widening at the scene. "What in hell happened here?" he demanded. Reed groaned. "That savage jumped us, Sheriff." "He attacked us." Nokoni rose slowly, standing tall, still calm but fierce as a storm about to break. "They beat an innocent man. I stopped them." The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster, uncertain. Evelyn stepped down from the saloon's porch, voice cutting through the murmurs. "He's telling the truth. Those two were trying to kill Samuel Brigg. Everyone saw." A tense silence hung. The sun finally dipped, painting the town blood red. And as the sheriff looked from the beaten cowboys to the unmoving Apache, he realized Dusty Hollow had changed forever that evening. The sun had vanished behind the jagged hills, leaving Dusty Hollow bathed in the cool gray of twilight. The echoes of the fight still lingered in the air, whispers, boots scuffing against dirt, and the uneasy silence that follows violence. Nokoni stood unmoving, his breath steady but his pulse still wild, like a war drum fading in the distance. Samuel Brigg lay half-conscious beside him, blood drying on his cheek. Sheriff Maddox scratched his beard, looking between the Apache warrior and the groaning Boone brothers. His hat tilted forward as if to hide his confusion. "This town don't need more trouble," he muttered. "But you sure stirred some up, stranger." Evelyn Carter stepped closer, her shawl drawn tight against the chill. Her eyes, sharp yet compassionate, fixed on the sheriff. "Sheriff Maddox, you know those two were half drunk. Everyone saw it." She turned toward the small crowd that had gathered, merchants, a blacksmith, a few miners. "Didn't you?" No one spoke. People shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to take sides. The Boone brothers had friends, and the Apache had none. Maddox sighed. "Look, Miss Carter, I ain't saying you're wrong. But this fella here," he nodded toward Nokoni, "he ain't got no right putting his hands on citizens." Evelyn's voice rose, clear and cutting. "And they had no right to beat an unarmed man half to death in the street. You'd do nothing if it weren't for him." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Enough. I'll see to Samuel. You," he pointed to Nokoni, "come with me. Just till we sort things out." Nokoni didn't flinch. He could see the distrust in every pair of eyes watching him. He'd known that look since childhood, the look that said outsider, savage, danger. His hand flexed unconsciously near his knife, but he let out a slow breath and nodded. "I'll go," he said softly. "But that man needs a doctor first." Evelyn's gaze softened. "My husband was a doctor," she said quietly. "He's gone now, but I still know a thing or two. Bring Samuel to my house." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but the Apache rides nowhere till I speak to Judge Carter in the morning." As Maddox helped Samuel to his feet, Nokoni walked beside them in silence. The whispers followed like ghost voices. "Shouldn't trust him. He's one of them desert killers. Maybe he's with those raiders who hit Carson's ranch last month." Evelyn heard every word, her jaw tightening. She didn't know why she cared, but something about Nokoni's calm defiance stirred her. Most men would have fled. He stood his ground, not with pride, but with quiet strength. When they reached Evelyn's home, a modest whitewashed cottage near the edge of town, she lit a lamp and motioned for them to lay Samuel on the settee. She knelt beside him, cleaning the gashes on his face with practiced hands. "He'll live," she murmured. "But he needs rest." Nokoni stood by the window, the lamplight tracing every muscle of his bare shoulders, his turquoise beads gleaming faintly. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, on the vast, lonely dark beyond the town's edge. Evelyn glanced up. "You risked your life for a man you barely know." "He gave me water once," Nokoni said simply. "A man's kindness is never forgotten." Her lips parted slightly, struck by the gravity of his words. In the lamplight, he seemed more spirit than man, carved from wind and stone. Something the world had nearly forgotten. Outside, hooves clattered in the street. The Boone brothers, half-beaten but vengeful, were already mounting their horses, whispering with two others. Their pride had been wounded deeper than their bodies. "We'll show that Apache what happens to those who cross us," Reed snarled. "Tonight." Back inside, Evelyn noticed Nokoni stiffen. He'd heard them, even through the walls. His hand brushed the hilt of his knife, then fell away. "They'll come," he said quietly. "When the night's deepest." Evelyn swallowed. "Then we'll be ready." Her tone surprised even herself. Fear trembled beneath her words, but something stronger burned there too. Courage she hadn't felt in years. Nokoni met her eyes. And for the first time since he entered Dusty Hollow, he saw something besides suspicion. He saw belief. Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping dust across the empty street. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, a warning, or perhaps a promise of what was to come. By midnight, every lamp in town had gone dark. But in Evelyn Carter's house, one light still burned. And beside it, the Apache warrior waited, watching the shadows move, knowing that before dawn, blood would once again stain the dirt of Dusty Hollow. The night settled heavy over Dusty Hollow, blanketing the town in silence broken only by the creak of wood and the whisper of wind between buildings. The desert stars glimmered faintly above, cold and distant. But Nokoni knew better. The peace was only the kind that came before a storm. Inside Evelyn Carter's small cottage, the lamplight cast a warm circle that seemed to fight off the darkness clawing at the windows. Samuel Brigg lay sleeping on the settee, his breathing shallow but steady. Evelyn sat beside him, exhaustion weighing on her features. Across the room, Nokoni stood motionless, his back to the fire, eyes fixed on the window like a sentinel carved from stone. "You haven't moved in an hour," Evelyn said softly, breaking the quiet. "You're waiting for them, aren't you?" Nokoni nodded once. "They will come." A man like Reed Boone does not forget his shame. She sighed, rubbing her hands together. "Then what do we do?" He turned toward her, his face calm but resolute. "You hide. I meet them outside. This is not your fight." Her eyes flared. "It became my fight the moment you saved Samuel's life. I won't hide in my own home." Nokoni's lips curved into something faint, not quite a smile, but close. "You have a brave heart, Evelyn Carter, but courage is no shield against bullets." A distant sound cut through the night. Hooves. 3, maybe 4 horses. Slow at first, then quickening. Nokoni's body tensed like a drawn bow. Evelyn stood too, heart pounding. He stepped toward the door, adjusting the strap of his knife sheath, his turquoise beads catching the lamplight. "Stay inside," he murmured, and then he was gone into the darkness. The door closed softly behind him. Evelyn stood frozen, every breath shallow. Through the thin curtains, she could see his silhouette moving through the moonlight, tall, broad, unafraid. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint echo of laughter, ugly, drunken laughter. The Boone brothers rode in with 2 others, faces hidden by the brims of their hats, guns glinting under the starlight. Reed Boone spat into the dirt. "There he is, the hero savage," he sneered. "Come to finish what you started, Apache?" Nokoni stepped forward, slow and steady. "You came to finish it," he said quietly, "but not with honor." Clayton chuckled darkly. "Honor? You don't belong in this town. You should have kept to your desert." Nokoni's voice dropped low, a growl beneath his calm. "This land was mine before you learned to ride." Reed drew his revolver. "Then you can die on it, savage." The first shot cracked through the still night. Evelyn gasped, ducking behind the curtain. Nokoni had already dropped low. The bullet split the air above his shoulder. In one fluid motion, he rolled, drew his knife, and flung it hard. The blade whistled through the air, striking Reed's hand. The revolver clattered into the dust. "Get him!" Clayton shouted. The other two riders fired blindly, muzzle flashes lighting the street like lightning. Nokoni darted behind a trough, drew a second knife from his belt, and lunged from the shadows. He moved like wind through tall grass, fast, silent, unstoppable. Within seconds, one of the hired guns screamed as Nokoni disarmed him, the weapon twisting from his hand. Clayton rushed forward, swinging wildly, but Nokoni caught his wrist, slammed him against a post, and sent him sprawling into the dirt. Evelyn could barely see through the window, but she heard everything: gunfire, grunts, the sound of boots scuffling. Then silence. Only the wind. Moments later, Nokoni stepped back into the lamplight. His chest rose and fell heavily, blood streaked across his arm, not his own. Behind him, the Boone brothers crawled away, humiliated again, fear now mingled with their hate. "You think this is over?" Reed shouted hoarsely. "You're dead, Apache. By sunrise, every man in this town will be gunning for you." Nokoni said nothing. His eyes burned like coals in the dark. He watched them ride off into the desert, vanishing into the black horizon. Evelyn rushed outside, her voice trembling. "You're hurt." "It is nothing," Nokoni said. "They will return. With more men." She looked up at him, the way his muscles glistened with sweat beneath the moonlight, the turquoise jewelry catching the faint light like fireflies. "Then we have till morning," she whispered. "We'll leave before they come back." Nokoni shook his head slowly. "I do not run from men like them. But you should not pay for my fight." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "I won't leave you. Not after tonight." Something flickered in his gaze, gratitude, maybe sorrow. "Then when dawn comes," he said quietly, "we stand together." The wind carried the sound of far-off thunder. Or maybe it was hooves again, gathering beyond the hills. And as the moon sank lower over Dusty Hollow, the Apache warrior and the widow waited in silence, knowing the real battle had only just begun. The first streaks of dawn brushed the horizon, turning the desert sky from ink to fire. Dusty Hollow was quiet, but not peaceful. Beneath that thin silence, danger waited coiled, patient, and cruel dot inside Evelyn Carter's cottage, the dim glow of a lantern flickered low. Nokoni sat by the window, bare-chested and still, sharpening his knife with a calm rhythm that echoed through the room. His long black hair hung loose over his shoulders, and the turquoise beads at his neck caught the faint morning light. Evelyn moved softly around the room, her eyes tracing him every now and then. "You haven't slept," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "Sleep makes a man slow." "You're not a man right now," she replied. "You're a storm waiting to break." That made him glance at her. His gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. "They will come when the sun rises. Boone men do not forgive. They will bring more guns, maybe the sheriff too." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she tied a bandage around his arm where a bullet had grazed him. "You saved us last night. But this town, these people, they won't see that. They'll only see an Apache standing over two white men." Nokoni's jaw clenched. "They already decided what I am." She stopped, her eyes locking with his. "Then let's give them something they can't deny truth. If they see what happened, maybe," he shook his head. "They will not see truth, only what they are told." A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither dared to say. The sound of hooves broke it. Evelyn froze. "They're here." Nokoni rose, every movement quiet and deliberate. He walked to the door, pushing it open just enough to see the street. The morning sun spilled across the town, lighting the dust that hung like smoke. A dozen riders approached from the edge of the ridge, Reed Boone at their head, his arm wrapped in a blood-stained sling. The sheriff rode beside them. Evelyn's breath hitched. "Maddox." "Stay behind me," Nokoni said. His voice had changed calm again, but with an edge of fire beneath it. The riders halted outside the cottage, boots hitting the ground as rifles were drawn. Sheriff Maddox stepped forward, his expression strained. "No Coney," he called out. "You made a mess here. Folks are scared. Let's end this peaceful." No Coney stepped into the light, tall and unflinching. The morning sun turned his skin bronze, his bare chest streaked with dust and blood. "I did not come to fight," he said. "They did." Reed sneered, his face twisted with hate. "You killed one of my men, you filthy savage. I'll see your scalp on my saddle before noon." No Coney's hand stayed near his knife but didn't move. "Your man raised a gun first. I only ended what he began." The sheriff's eyes darted between them. He could feel the tension like lightning in the air. "Boone, hold it. Nobody's dying today." Evelyn stepped out then, pushing the door open. Her voice was sharp, clear, and fearless. "Sheriff, you know the truth. You saw Samuel Brigg. You saw what those men did to him. No Coney stopped them when you wouldn't." The townsfolk who had gathered whispered among themselves. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others spat in the dirt, eyes cold. Reed pointed a shaking hand at her. "That woman's bewitched by him. You gonna believe her over your own people, Sheriff?" Maddox swallowed hard. "I believe what I saw." But before he could say more, Reed drew his revolver again. The moment stretched, a heartbeat frozen in the desert sun. Then the shot rang out. No Coney moved faster than anyone could see. He shoved Evelyn aside, the bullet grazing his shoulder, and in a single motion hurled his knife. It struck Reed's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning into the dust. The crowd gasped. For a moment, nobody breathed. Reed fell to his knees, screaming in pain. His men raised their rifles, but Maddox barked, "Hold your fire." No Coney stood still, chest heaving, eyes fixed on Reed. "Enough," he said, voice steady as stone. "This town bleeds because of your hate." "No more." Evelyn rose, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Please," she said to Maddox, her voice trembling. "Let him go. He doesn't belong to this violence." Maddox stared at No Coney for a long moment, then lowered his weapon. "You ride out of here, Apache. Don't look back." No Coney's gaze lingered on Evelyn long enough to speak all that words couldn't. Then he nodded once. "I will go," he said softly. "But remember, I did not start this war." He turned toward the desert, his shadow stretching long behind him as the sun climbed higher. Evelyn watched him walk away, her heart caught between fear and something deeper. The townsfolk stood silent, knowing Dusty Hollow would never forget the morning an Apache walked away from their hate alive, proud, and unbroken. The desert stretched endless before him, painted gold and crimson beneath the rising sun. No Coney rode alone, his stallion's hooves whispering against the sand. Behind him, Dusty Hollow shrank into a haze, swallowed by distance and dust. He didn't look back, not once. Some places weren't meant for peace. Blood still stained his shoulder, and the morning wind stung the wound. But it wasn't pain that burned in him. It was what he had left behind. Evelyn's face, her voice trembling as she begged the sheriff to let him go, haunted his thoughts. She had stood between him and a mob. No one had ever done that before. By noon, the land began to change. Dry plains giving way to red cliffs and wild mesquite. Ahead rose Red Mesa, the sacred high ground of his people, where the rocks told old stories and the wind carried the voices of ancestors. No Coney hadn't returned here in years. Not since the soldiers had driven his band north, scattering them like leaves in a storm. He dismounted near a cluster of stones painted with faded handprints, signs of his tribe. The place was silent except for the cry of a hawk circling above. He knelt, pressing his hand to the earth. "I have walked among ghosts," he whispered in Apache. "Now I return home." But peace never lingered long. A distant echo reached his ears, the faint rhythm of hooves. Nokoni's eyes narrowed. He turned, spotting 2 riders in the distance, climbing fast along the ridge. His hand drifted to his knife, but when the riders came closer, he saw their faces. One was Taza, a warrior from Nokoni's old band, younger but with the same fierce eyes. The other was Kael, a woman draped in a tattered blanket, her long black hair streaked with ash. Her face was sharp, proud, and tired. "Nokoni," Taza called, reining in his horse. "You're alive." "Barely," Nokoni said. "What brings you here?" Kaya's voice trembled, but her gaze stayed steady. "The white men are coming again, soldiers from Fort Ashland. They say an Apache killed settlers in Dusty Hollow. They ride with Boone's men. They mean to wipe out anyone left on this land." Nokoni's expression hardened. "Boone." Taza nodded. "His hate has become their excuse." For a long time, Nokoni said nothing. He looked out across the desert, his land, his home, now the stage for another blood debt. "Then it ends here," he said finally. Kael frowned. "You cannot fight them alone, Nokoni. There are too many." "I will not hide," he said. "If I run, others will die in my shadow. They must see that not all Apaches bend." Taza exchanged a glance with Kael. "You always carried more burden than any man should," he murmured. "But if you stand, we stand." As the sun began to sink, the 3 prepared for the coming storm. Nokoni gathered brush and stone, fashioning traps along the narrow paths leading to Red Mesa. Taza laid out rifles scavenged from old raids, their metal dulled with time but still deadly. Kael lit a small fire and sang softly, her voice trembling like the wind through canyon reeds, an old song of warriors going to meet the dawn. When night fell, Nokoni sat alone at the edge of the mesa, watching the stars shimmer above. The turquoise around his neck gleamed faintly. Reflecting the fireligh to Dot, he thought of Evelyn again, of her courage, her defiance. Maybe she was watching the same stars, wondering if he still lived. He closed his eyes and whispered, "The desert keeps my word, even if men do not." Down below, torches flickered on the horizon, dozens of them. The soldiers were coming, and Boone rode among them, his arms still bandaged, his pride still burning. Taza crouched beside Nokoni. "There are many." Nokoni stood, his silhouette framed by the fire behind him, tall, shirtless and fierce, tribal jewelry glinting against the dark. "Then the desert will take many." Kael rose beside them, her knife gleaming in her hand. "For our land," she whispered. "For our honor," Taza added. Nokoni's eyes burned like twin embers. "For truth." And as the torches drew closer, the Apache warrior turned toward the canyon, his muscles tense, his soul steady. He had left Dusty Hollow to escape hate, but fate had followed him home. The wind rose again, carrying sand and prayer into the night, whispering the name of a man who refused to kneel. The sun was sinking into the desert horizon, bleeding red across the land. The air smelled of gunpowder and sweat. Every sound the whisper of wind, the shifting of boots on gravel carried the tension of what was coming. Kael stood on the ridge overlooking Dusty Hollow, his broad chest rising and falling in rhythm with the drumbeat of his heart. His long black hair, loose and wild, flowed behind him like a banner of defiance. His skin bore streaks of dirt and blood, each mark telling a story of survival. Around his neck, the turquoise and bone jewelry of his people glimmered faintly in the dying light. Below, the cowboys gathered. Their horses snorted, sensing the fear of men who pretended to be brave. Sheriff Callan was among them, jaw set tight, rifle resting against his saddle. "He's coming for you, Sheriff," one of the men muttered. "You should have left that family be." Callan's eyes narrowed. "That Apache's just one man," he said, spitting into the dust. and one man don't change the law. But Kael was no ordinary man. He moved like a ghost down the slope, silent and sure, each step measured. Behind him, his allies Roka and Neshka followed close, their faces painted with the ashes of their ancestors. The three of them moved with the quiet fury of the desert night dot at the edge of town. Lanterns flickered in the windows of the saloon and general store. The woman Lena stood by the cottage window, her face pale in the dim light. She clutched her father's old rifle in trembling hands, her eyes scanning the darkness. When she saw Kael's silhouette emerging from the dust, her breath caught. He looked up at her just once and nodded. No words, no promises. Just a look that said everything. Then the first shot rang out. The sound cracked through the air, echoing between the wooden walls of the town. Kael dropped behind a trough, dust exploding around him. He rolled, drew his knife, and lunged forward like lightning. A cowboy fell before he even saw the blade flash. Roka fired from behind a wagon, hitting another man clean in the shoulder. The others scrambled, shouting orders, firing wildly into the smoke and darkness. The battle became chaos fire, gunpowder, and fury blending into a single storm. Kael moved through it like a spirit of vengeance. He disarmed one man with a strike of his forearm, then turned and kicked another into the dirt. The sheriff fired again, the bullet grazing Kael's ribs. Pain burned through him, but he didn't slow. He caught the sheriff by the coat, ripped the rifle away, and threw him to the ground. Dust and blood rose around them. The two men stared at each other, years of hatred, prejudice, and pain burning between them. "This is where it ends, Sheriff," Kael growled. "You think you can take justice into your own hands?" Callan sneered. "You're no better than the savages you run with." Kael's eyes darkened. "Then I'll show you what a savage can do." The fight was brutal, bare fists and grit. Each punch carried the weight of history. Callan swung first, striking Kael's jaw, but Kael absorbed it, retaliating with a blow that sent the sheriff crashing against the hitching post dot. By the time the dust settled, the other cowboys had fled or fallen. The street was littered with broken rifles and echoing silence. Kael stood tall, blood dripping from a cut on his brow, chest heaving under the crimson sky. The sheriff lay groaning at his feet. Lena rushed from the cottage, her skirt catching on the boards as she ran. She dropped to her knees beside her father, who was awake now, watching the scene through weary eyes. "It's over," Kael said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Your town is safe. Your father's honor is restored." Lena looked up at him, tears glinting in her eyes. "Kael, what will you do now?" He turned toward the open desert where the wind whispered through the sagebrush. "A man like me doesn't stay. The land calls me back." And as the sun disappeared completely, leaving only a band of red fire across the horizon, Kael walked away, his shadow stretching long and proud behind him. A lone warrior fading into the dusk, the town would remember his name long after the dust settled. The next morning, Dusty Hollow awoke under a silence it had never known before. The gunfire was gone, the shouts and hate replaced by the whisper of the wind. Smoke still curled from the burnt wagon outside the sheriff's office, and the ground bore the marks of the night's violent blood. Boot prints, shattered glass, and the ghost of what once was. Kael stood at the edge of town, the rising sun bathing his skin in gold. His long black hair moved gently with the morning breeze, and the turquoise and bone jewelry around his neck caught the light like fragments of memory. His bare chest carried fresh scars, each a reminder of why he had come here, to defend the man who raised him, and to bury the hate that had lived in this land for too long. Lena walked up slowly, her boots crunching on the dry earth. She held a folded cloth in her hand, a bandage and a prayer. "You should rest," she said softly, her voice still trembling from all that had happened. You bled more than you let anyone see." Kael turned to her, the corners of his lips tugging into a faint smile. "A warrior rests when the wind stops blowing," he replied, his tone calm, grounded, as if he already belonged to another world. Her eyes searched his face, memorizing every line, every mark of grit and sorrow. "If you ride out now, you'll vanish like the desert dust," she whispered. "And no one will know what you did for this town." He looked back toward the quiet main street, toward the sheriff's office where Callan now sat, nursing his wounds, stripped of power and pride. The townsfolk had gathered at the saloon door, watching Kael with a mix of awe and shame. They didn't speak, but their silence was louder than any apology. Kael took a deep breath and said, "They don't need to know my story. They just need to live better because of it." Lena's father stepped out from the cottage porch, leaning heavily on his cane. His once broken body carried new strength, not from healing, but from gratitude. He met Kael's gaze and nodded slowly. "You saved my life, son," he said, his voice coarse. "But more than that, you saved this town's soul." Kael walked toward him, dust swirling around his boots. He clasped the old man's shoulder. "I only did what honor demanded," he said. "You stood when others wouldn't. That's worth saving." There was a pause, the kind that felt eternal. Then Lena stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Kael, where will you go?" He looked toward the distant desert, where the red mesas rose like sleeping giants under the morning light. "North," he said quietly. "There's still Apache blood in the sand that needs cleansing. There are still voices that cry in the wind." Her eyes welled, and before she could stop herself, she took his hand. "The wind doesn't keep names," she said. Kael turned to her, his dark eyes glimmering like obsidian under the sun. "The desert does," he replied. "It remembers everything that's buried in it." Then, without another word, he stepped away, his silhouette framed against the endless horizon. Roka and Neshka were waiting there with their horses, his brothers in spirit, bound by blood and purpose. The three mounted their horses as the town watched in silence. Lena stood in the dust, holding the bandage she never got to use. The sun rose higher, painting the desert gold and crimson. Kael looked back once, the wind brushing through his hair, the turquoise beads at his neck glowing faintly. He raised his hand in silent farewell, then rode out, his horse kicking up clouds of sunlit dust. The people of Dusty Hollow would tell stories for years of the Apache who faced an entire town and walked away. Some called him a savior, others a ghost. But Lena knew better. He was neither. He was the storm that broke the chain of hate. As the day wore on, the desert swallowed his trail. But his presence lingered like the echo of thunder long after the lightning fades. And when the wind moved through the canyon that night, it carried a whisper across the sand, soft yet eternal. Kael. The name of a warrior. The name of a man who fought not for revenge, but for peace. And the desert, as always, remembered.